Welcome to the Exhorter podcast, where it is our aim to stir up love and good works through bite-sized biblical conversation. We want to welcome you to this special holiday episode of the Exhorter podcast. If you have young children,
yes,
here's your spoiler alert. We're going to have a frank conversation today about Christmas. So if there are young ears listening and there are stories and mythologies you want to preserve, now's your chance to pause the episode and have the kids leave.
You're already telling them it's okay to preserve these. So, wow, he's coming right out.
Did you call it the holiday episode? Because you didn't want to call it the Christmas episode?
Yeah, no, I'm being
Season's greetings.
Yeah, I thought as a local county government, you'd be on board with that approach.
I thought Jesus was the reason for the season.
I know. Trying to take Christ out of Christmas? Crying out loud, Kyle.
Well, Christmas, this time of year brings up a lot of questions. This is absolutely my favorite time of year. All right. First of all, I just love the cold weather.
Mm-hmm.
I love the cold weather.
And the cold weather.
I wrote an article about this. I've actually preached this as a sermon before. All the things I love about this time of year, like reason for the season. Yeah, we don't want this episode to go this direction, but I think it's obvious. Most even reasonably well-studied Bible students know that Jesus wasn't born in December. Okay. December 25th is not his birthday. There's a 1 in 365 chance that it was, I suppose, but
I like those odds.
Never tell me the odds. But it's not his birthday, okay? And that's not the direction we want to go. That's a little more elementary. But I love this time of year, even though it's not his birthday, and even though the holiday or celebration of his birth is not something bound upon us in Scripture. I just love that things are brighter. There's lights up everywhere. People are cheerful, singing. There's more generosity this time of year. And even though it's not Jesus' birthday, I appreciate the fact that people are talking about him this time of year. So I love this time of year, but it does bring up a lot of questions for us as Christians. What place should this holiday, if we even want to call it that, what place should this hold in our lives, and what kind of observance should this look like with our families? I guess one basic question.
Hey, are you done with your intro yet? Or are you just
This is a long intro.
We're into the topic now.
Oh, I thought I was going to. Okay, go ahead.
No. I'm letting this go naturally, man.
Okay.
We're into it.
Go ahead.
All right.
I'm not editing any of this. This is good.
Paul?
I'm going to cross my arms here and just say Paul.
I'm sorry. I just interrupted your flow. Go ahead.
Keep the flow.
Or I just stopped it.
You threw off my groove.
You threw out the Emperor's groove.
Well, it just brings up some interesting questions. I mean, first of all, there's the one side of this where it's the birth of Jesus, which, again, isn't really biblical this time of year. But the other side is you get the Santa Claus, reindeer, Christmas tree, gifts under the tree that has no connection to the Bible whatsoever. Is there a place for that in the lives of Christians, or should we just completely... This is something worldly that we should have nothing to do with? Where do you guys see? Now, I know you guys have Christmas lights up at your house, so I spied on you.
Paul?
Well, that's what I'm supposed to do after we finish here is go put up my Christmas lights. But
and
yes.
I asked Paul, I said, Paul, can you take this one? Because you're so much more wiser, and you've been dealing with these fables for a lot longer.
And he's got a white beard like Santa.
Oh, he does. It's coming in.
That's true, especially when I let it grow.
Yeah.
We celebrate Christmas as a family, and always have. I haven't, this question of talking to your kids about Santa Claus, or you could expand that to the Easter Bunny, or, any of these
Tooth Fairy.
Well, Paul, you come from the North Pole. So, I mean, obviously you were around there. You probably saw him.
I was trying not to react when Kai was talking about it being cold, because it doesn't get cold here. I'm sorry.
Do Canadians believe in Santa Claus?
Yeah, he lives right where we live.
Right where, like down the block.
I don't know if it was like Belschnickel or something that.
Yeah, he plays hockey too, by the way. But I think for myself, it's not just about celebrating Christmas. Sometimes it's as Christians, my first reaction has been, yeah, as a family, we celebrate Christmas. But as Christians at a church, the first thing we're going to do is argue about Christmas and where it comes from. And You're correct, right? It's not really, Jesus was probably not born anywhere near December 25th. And we also know the Catholic origins of Christ Mass, and therefore don't want to be associated with celebrating anything that is, quote, a Christian holiday that God did not himself ordain. Right?
Or even the idea of holiday is holy day.
Right. Well, that's exactly something I was going to get into is that. But I think sometimes for myself, and I'm pointing back at myself. I feel like I've been doing that for a lot of my life where I jump to that, that's not what it is. Yeah. And sometimes even my kids might be echoing that, want to point out that's not what this is. It's not Jesus's birthday, but are we missing something? And are we being counterproductive in our arguments about Christmas and maybe approaching it differently? So I was thinking about talking about that a little bit.
That's going to be a good direction for this conversation, but I'll add my 2 cents worth. I've always looked at this as, I do Christmas, and it's more just an American thing. I always de-emphasize. So maybe this will play into the direction you want to take the conversation today. But I've always tended to just de-emphasize any of the religious aspects of it, any of the nativity, birth of Jesus aspects of it. And I always try to incorporate my appreciation for cumulative, all that Jesus did in his life, every Sunday and every day of my life. But we certainly, I just look at it as kind of an American thing. It's a fun thing that we do. John?
Christmas in my household, it was, growing up, we didn't actually celebrate Halloween, but we celebrated Christmas. So it was kind of like an interesting mix there. But I was in choir for like 11 years, and this is the best time of the year. We'd have caroling, and we would do Christmas music all the time. And I just grew up on all Christmas songs, and majority of them focus around, the nativity and Christ. And so I have a strong affinity for those songs, but then I do like sit back and go, what's the focus I'm going to have with my kids on those, kinds of things? And is it okay to sing those songs? And we're going to go caroling fellow members to some shut-ins in a couple weeks. And I was trying to go through all the list of all the songs that aren't religious. Seriously, I got 4. I got 4 songs I know.
Christmas Time by Smashing Pumpkins is my favorite.
Totally. Well, songs that the kids know, and the songs that, don't have religious connotations, so we can go out there and carol with them. It makes you realize for lack of a better term, a religious holiday for majority of the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for some people, that's the only time they're going to church, is they're going to visit on Christmas. But I think the first point about how we argue it is, we become hypocritical. There's some who, we don't even want to talk about it being called Christmas. Let's call it a holiday.
Xmas,
because it's not Christ's birthday. We don't want to associate with Christ Mass, the Catholic background. Let's call it a holiday. Well, we're hypocritical, and Kyle, you already brought it up. Holiday actually means holy day. So if we're calling it a holiday, we're calling it a holy. That's really the background of the word. So we're a little hypocritical already. Some would say, well, there's pagan traditions that actually have been incorporated into Christmas. And we've heard sermons about whether it be the Christmas tree or gifts or ornaments. We don't have to get into all that, but there's some pagan origins in where those came from. But at the same time, we have things like that in everything we do in culture that we kind of ignore.
Yeah. That's why I kind of explained it. The Goodwin take on it is it's an American thing. You don't want to do something that gives the wrong connotation. You don't want to do something that is directly connected to idolatry or Satan or things that are misrepresenting the scripture. And I know some people have kind of had that viewpoint where it is pagan and it is associated with the Catholic Church, the idea of the Christ Mass. So a New Testament Christian shouldn't have anything to do with it. And my response has always been, if someone sees a Christmas tree up in my house, I don't think they assume I'm Catholic. I think they just assume that I'm like any other American this time of year. So I don't see that there's a problem. This is my 2 cents. You might come to a different conclusion on this. Just the same as I don't think that if I dress my kids up in costumes, have them knock on someone's door. No, okay, I don't trick or treat my kids.
Or if I see a pumpkin on your doorstep, am I thinking,
are you going to assume that I worship
Satan?
Exactly.
Satan worshiper.
No one makes it, even though Halloween, Hallows Eve does have some pagan roots. That's not what it is in America today.
Society whitewashes the intent and focuses of things to the point where if I look at people and I know that they celebrate Christmas, I cannot make a definitive commentary that they believe in God or believe that this is a celebration of Christ's birth, because it is now a social. Yeah, it's literally like 4th of July. Literally a social holiday.
Atheists who put up Christmas trees. There are Jews who put up Christmas trees. It's not a uniquely Catholic thing. go back 400 or 500 years in time, and I think a Christian back then, it might have had a different connotation, and it might have given a certain impression that maybe Christians should have avoided then.
Yeah. We're going really deep on this on the outside here, but I mean, I've also heard people say, well, okay, that's your perspective about it. What do you think God's view of that holiday and that perspective is? And I say it's a good practice to be thinking about that.
Yeah, we're going to go there.
But I don't know that we can know. In some cases we can, but there's also some arrogance there to think that this is the way God thinks about that. So,
but I think we've got to be careful that we're consistent. We're hypocritical if we pick one thing that we treat this way, but we treat other things different. So every day of the week, for the most part, is named after a mythological god.
Sure.
You know, we still call Thursday, but it's actually named after Thor, the mythological god Thor. Biblically, the only thing I can think of that relates is first century Christians when you consider eating meat. You know, you look at meat in the marketplace. It might have been sacrificed to an idol at one time, right? Mm-hmm. That came up in 1 Corinthians, but it had lost that significance when it was put on the table of a Christian home. So Paul taught the Christians that they were not honoring an idol simply by eating meat that had once been sacrificed to an idol. Now, for some, it bothered their conscience. They chose not to do that. But in 1 Corinthians 10, the meat had lost the pagan significance, but that was a topic that may relate somewhat here.
Well, the way I connect it is I'm convinced what Paul is describing there in 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10 is that dining in an idol's temple was absolutely wrong. The meat itself wasn't the problem. It's the location and the impression you're giving. So having a Christmas tree up and all that, it's the equivalent of taking the meat, buying in the marketplace. I don't care what this was offered to. I'm just buying meat for me. You take it home and that's your thing. Now, I'm not going to go to a Catholic church that they look at as worshiping and venerating Mary or the birth of Jesus, and this is a special, holy, sanctified day, and to them it is worship. I'm not going to go to something like that. That to me is the equivalent of dining in an idol's temple.
Yeah, I'm no more worshiping a pagan idol by having a Christmas tree in my home than I am by honoring Thor by calling Thursday. But at the same time, I'm not going to be going into a Catholic church or a pagan festival. That's different. So we're inconsistent. We're hypocritical if we pick one thing that we treat one way and we treat others different. The second thing I think, I'm just, thinking of myself, is back to what you mentioned, Kyle, about, Facebook comment arguments and how productive they may be or not. Are we stirring up strife, or are we really trying to educate people about what the Bible really says?
Are we trying to divide?
Yeah, we're trying to divide.
To what glory is that?
To what glory? Yeah. I mean, Paul said in 2 Timothy 2:14, remind them of these things and charge them before God, not to quarrel about words, which does no good, but only ruins the hearers. Well, I'm going to tell you, I've heard some debates over the years about this topic that I don't know what God thought of it other than what I read in the scriptures, but I don't know that it went to the glory of God or even brought people closer to God or people closer to each other. It probably brought them further apart. It doesn't mean we don't teach people about the truth. I want to be very clear about that. We should. But unless we're teaching the truth, as the Bible tells us, with gentleness, patience, kindness, forbearance, and love, then we really aren't operating the way the Bible tells us to operate, when it comes to topics like this. And sometimes I haven't really heard it shared in love.
Sure. So do you view Halloween, Christmas, these things as liberties?
I would compare it to what we just said as far as the meat in the 1 Corinthians. Very similar to that.
Yeah.
There's no significance to it.
That it could be wrong the way that we interact with brethren, or we push things on people, or we force them into violating their conscience. It could be wrong, but mostly wrong about the way that we approach these topics than the topic itself.
If we're celebrating it as if it's a religious holiday ordained by God, the way the Catholic Church may teach, then that's a problem.
Right.
We need to teach the truth about that. But if our purpose is more to stir up strife and to make a point rather than to truly bring people to God, and let's remember, majority of the people that celebrate Christmas don't even have a relationship with God.
Right.
And they may see God more as it's a convenient time to acknowledge there is one at Christmas, and they don't think about it the rest of the year. Do you think we're really making a point by saying, well, it's actually not his birthday, instead of actually approaching it in a different way, which we talk about in a moment?
I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the things I like about this time of year, right or wrong, people are at least a little more amenable to having a conversation about Jesus. We're told to be ready in season and out of season. I tell you what, Christmas is an in season. People are, if you want to have a conversation with a stranger about Jesus, you're never really sure how that's going to go. But I bet you it'll go over a little easier this time of year. People are a little more willing to have that conversation. Their mind is already occupied by thoughts of Jesus, maybe misunderstood, but their mind is already in that place, and it's a little easier to have those conversations. So make a little effort this time of year to have those conversations, and not just from the standpoint of trying to correct people, but use it as a springboard to go to more meaningful conversations about Jesus, not just the obvious surface level, inconsistencies or biblical inaccuracies about being born on December 25th. Now, I relate this more to Romans 14. 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10 and Romans 14 are very similar. The differences are nuanced, but I think we're a little more precisely in Romans 14. And it even talks about, I think it's the difference between Jew and Gentile. One will eat meat, things like pork, things that are considered unclean under the law of Moses. That's the Gentile. Others won't. And the idea is you follow your conscience. And these are matters where God doesn't say right or wrong. It's not right or wrong to eat meat. You can eat meat if you want. You're not sinner if you don't eat meat. It becomes a problem when you start binding these things on other people. And so he even uses as an example, I think it's probably a reference to the Sabbath, but Romans 14 and verse 5, one person esteems one day above another, another esteems every day alike. Let each one be fully convinced in his own mind. He who observes the day observes it to the Lord. He who does not observe the day, to the Lord he does not observe it. So the idea is to be fully convinced in your own mind. Follow your conscience. Follow the word of God. And if it's something that is not sinful or wrong, then it's a matter of conscience. And your conscience might convict you differently than mine. Your conscience might look at the Catholic and pagan influences and just not permit you to be comfortable with it. I would say don't violate your conscience. Go with your conscience. Mine might permit me to go ahead and put up a Christmas tree and presents and talk about Santa. When I look at Romans 14, I feel like it's saying you shouldn't condemn me for that. I'm going to stand before God and give an answer for what I did. You'll stand before God and give an answer
but can I condemn you for lying to your children?
Okay, now here's the fun one.
I mean, I don't want to rush that one.
Before you leave, because he teed something up. What you said at the very beginning of what you were talking about right now, Kyle, was I think my last point was if we're arguing about these things the way we sometimes tend to, I think we also de-emphasize Jesus. And I'll just give you an example. Growing up, it's okay to talk about Jesus every day, right? But sometimes on Christmas, almost felt odd talking about Jesus on Christmas because the last thing that we wanted to do was to suggest in any way that we were like the Catholic Church or even like some of the denominational churches around us. And could you say maybe even dismiss talking about the Lord? And is that actually a sad thing by the way that we were doing it?
Could that be Satan as well?
Well, I think disguised, disguised as an angel of light. When I use the phrase that we sometimes see in the bumper stickers these days, Jesus is the reason for the season. And we know that, we react to that. But listeners, Jesus is the reason for every season. Jesus is the reason for every day. If we ever get to the point that we're not talking about Jesus, and Kyle, you said it, we have an opportunity where people are thinking about Jesus more than ever this time of year, rather than coming in and trying to educate them about what Christmas, the origins of Christmas, or it may be wrong to celebrate it religiously as a God-ordained holiday. Why don't we use that as an opportunity to emphasize Jesus and teach people about it? We can do both. But I think sometimes maybe the pendulum has gone so far the other direction that we don't even want to talk about Jesus. Even on a day, if Sunday falls on a Christmas day, which this year it happens to do, sometimes it's been like, ooh, we don't even want to mention it, or we have to just make sure we're clear that we don't do that here. Or maybe we should make it clear. This is an opportunity that there may be people coming who have never come to church, who may pop in and we want them to see Jesus.
If you do not do a nativity sermon on that Sunday morning, what a waste, Kyle.
My sermon title is "Mary, Did You Know?" Yeah. And Paul, I've been thinking more the last couple of years in Romans 14, the scripture I brought up. One person esteems one day above another. In the next verse, it says, "He who observes the day to the Lord." And Paul's saying, what's wrong with that? And I've been wondering more and more. The holiday of Christmas is a special event, doesn't belong in the church. It's not something to be bound church-wide on everyone. But I'm beginning to look at this verse, these couple of verses, and I wonder, what is the harm? It might be based on misunderstanding, or if you just acknowledge, I know this isn't his birthday, but I am going to take this day and I am going to make it a day where I reflect upon the birth of Jesus and what his life accomplished and how awesome an event that was in human history. You're observing that to the Lord. I'm beginning to wonder.
Because Kyle, the emphasis is not on the birth, it's on the death, burial, and resurrection. That is why.
Well, why did the heavens open and angels sing when they announced his arrival? John, you get to sing your spiritual
angels we have heard on high
for Christmas. Yeah. I'm trying to give you that.
Thank you. I appreciate
that loophole.
But I think we've gotten so afraid of being viewed as denominational or Catholic or whatever it might be, that sometimes we forget to be Christians. And that's my, when we think about what we are, and for those who are listening, the Clovis Church of Christ is an independent group of Christians that our whole goal is just to be Christians and be what the Bible teaches us to be. We're not a denomination. We're not part of anything else, but we're not defined by what we are not. We're defined by what we are, and we're Christians, and we want you to know Jesus. And sometimes I think we're so afraid to be associated with something that we forget what we are.
Absolutely. Yeah. The problem there is if you put everything on a spectrum, everyone draws lines in different places. And when you draw lines in different places, people like black and white. It makes them feel secure. It makes them feel confident that they are doing what's right. And I totally agree with that. But not everything can be painted on it, which is why you need
who else like to do that? The Pharisees.
The Pharisees, yes.
And let me circle back to Romans 14. At the end of the chapter, he says, "Do you have faith? Have it to yourself before God. Happy is he who does not condemn himself in what he approves." And the idea here is that this doesn't, again, to reiterate, I am not suggesting this becomes a church thing, because it will. First of all, there's no precedent or authority for that in Scripture to make this a church thing. Second of all, it's going to violate some people's conscience, and that's not a good thing either. We don't do that to other people. But if it's something you do, and it's a choice you've made, and it's for you and your family, have faith to yourself before God, and no one should look down on that. It's a good thing.
But practically what that means is we're not putting up a Christmas tree at the church building, because it's not a religious celebration in that way.
And this December 25th is going to be, it's not a special Christmas service. No. It's every Sunday is special.
Every Sunday is special. But you know what? If we talk about the birth of Jesus on that day, or we are emphasizing that because the world is focused on the King of Kings on that day, and even those who really don't know him, is that an opportunity for us to really talk about him more? Absolutely.
Well, and how is celebrating the birth of Jesus, how is that a bad thing? When we bind it on others and make it a custom or practice that everyone must do, that violates Romans 14. But
that's why I mentioned the death, burial, resurrection bit. I've heard people say that's the reason. It's not the focus of his birth. You can't have one without the other people.
Yeah. Well, we talk about his life. We talk about his birth. We talk about all of it, but it's an opportunity. And I would say I regret any time I've ever de-emphasized Christ this time of year.
Can I say that's the longest intro to a podcast? Okay, we're going to title this episode "Christmas and Santa," because we just spent 20 some odd minutes talking about it's. All right, it's important. No, it's really important.
Romans 14. Romans 14. If you want to lie to your kids, then your conscience is clean to do. Go ahead and do it.
Yeah, thanks for giving me that.
No. Come on. Look. The kids have wonder and fantasy. I tell my kids, the tooth fairy comes and leaves a glitter sprinkled dollar bill. It used to be $5, but
we have to be consistent on these things too, because our kids play with each other too much. If you use glitter on your dollars, I need to use glitter on my dollars, and use coins or dollars, because I
used to be a $5 bill, but economy's tough. It's hit the tooth fairy
coins.
Hard.
Those Susan B. Anthony. That's more special. This is actually a topic. So some of the start of this conversation, we open up our Wednesday night high school Bible class a lot of the times to what questions do you have, kids? And this is actually one of those, I call them squirrels. It's kind of a sidetrack, conversation. But the question was, is it a sin to deceive your kids and teach them about Santa Claus?
So since you were teaching the class, what was the answer?
So I'll get back to them after the podcast.
Okay.
No, I said that, I think one of the reasons why people ask this question is, I think we talked about before, is especially young people, they're trying to poke this idea of Christianity and see if they get hypocrisy on the other side. Well, lying is a sin. So are you saying there's certain types of lies that are okay?
Didn't you dress up as the Easter Bunny one year, John?
We didn't give a disclaimer for that one. Come on. Yeah.
That wasn't the real Easter Bunny at my house.
So what do you guys think? Is it deceitful and a lie to have the fantasy of Santa Claus?
I think you should be careful with and not try and replace, teaching them right from wrong to do good should be anchored in God.
Well, that's why Elf on the Shelf is definitely Satan right there, because that thing creeps in there, and now you're only acting good because of that thing. Get that thing out of your house now.
Our elf just showed up.
You better banish him to the garage. No,
It's Princess the Elf.
There's aspects to the Santa of when you sing the songs, he sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake, knows if you've done bad and good. And I think that I've even had a conversation with my kids. You mean like God? Right? Like God knows when I've done bad and good. And I think that there may be some risk in there, is what you're saying, as far as the way that you approach this myth.
I don't think I can give a biblical answer on this like definitively, but I can give some biblically guided thoughts. And I would say you do well to be cautious with going overboard with this stuff. I mean, like I said, if we're going to be consistent, I do the tooth fairy with my kids. And at some point when they're kids, it's fun, it's fantasy. They'll grow up and grow out of it. My kids, they're still at an age where they can pretend they're unicorns and things like that. They live in a fantasy world, and it's kind of fun, a fun extension of their childlike innocence to keep that alive and occasionally spur it on and encourage it. But I don't want to get overboard with it. I don't lean too heavily into the idea that Santa watches you all the time. I want them to be good because I want them to know that's how they respect mom and dad. I want them to do good because God created them to do good. I want to emphasize those things and make sure I don't overdo it with the fantasy or Christmas stuff. And there'll come an age where they grow out of it, and it's not something I need to. I don't know. That's just my perspective on it. And I personally, I look at this in that category of Romans 14 stuff. You might come to a different conclusion, and I don't want to tell you what you're doing is right or wrong necessarily for lack of stronger scriptural support. And I'll let you make a judgment in your family. But if you guys don't talk about Santa, just make sure your kids don't spoil it for my kids or else.
So you attribute it to the world of playing make-believe with your kids and storytelling and that kind of world. You're not deceiving them for.
Yeah. What's the end of deceiving them? What's the purpose? What's the goal of it?
Well, I mean, it could be wrong if you're trying to get them to behave, right? I mean, if you're trying to deceive them because you're hopefully that their desire for those presents will keep them in line and order, versus showing them that they really need to do good because God sees them and God judges them.
You have a tired, screaming 3-year-old. You'll do anything. You'll do anything to get them to stop screaming.
So Satan visits you when you're at your weakest. So Santa Claus, you're right. I want the wisdom from Paul. Paul, you've been doing this myth longer than us. Tell me, do I go home and make my kids cry today? I will. I'll do it.
Well, from the Polar Express, I don't know if the bell still rings for my children. I think I don't know if I think they ring the bell and they can't hear it anymore. We did. I grew up with it. It was more of a family tradition than anything else. But I think the question asked by these kids.
Sasquatch, yes, but Santa Claus, no. Where do you draw the line in the Nerlin
family? My goodness.
Yeah, that's a split our family on that one. We all know the origins of Santa Claus, and it's all mythical. It's make believe, just like the Easter Bunny or the Tooth Fairy. But I think the kids bring up a good question because, do we confuse our kids at all by, you think about the characteristics of Santa Claus are very close to Jesus, as far as his goodness and watcher of things that we do and those kind of things. Of course, if you think about it, it was St. Nicholas in the early 200s. And then over time, it wasn't really the last probably several hundred years that the idea of Santa Claus came into being and became ever more popular into the Santa Claus we know today, really in America, say in particular, where this image that you see on a Coca-Cola commercial or back of a magazine back in the day define what he looked like as this jolly old man. But we did it. I grew up with that, and it was also an origin of somebody who was good and focused on being good. And I thought that was good. But I think the kids bring up something that made me think a little bit about that. But I have no problem with it. It's something I have to think more about, to be honest.
I think that if you're, I guess my honest, no, I should always be honest. That's a weird thing to say. I could hear my dad. My dad always says, well, don't say honestly, because you should always be honest. Okay. But as your kids get older and they start asking more serious questions about it, if you have to start, I don't know, bending over backwards to keep the story alive, I think maybe you do well to sit down and have a conversation with them and just kind of explain the fun of the holiday and how we don't want to spoil it for the younger kids. And, you might reach a point. I would say have some fun with it. But once they get to a certain age and start asking real questions, don't, because I do see the valid question that the high schoolers are asking, that many people ask this time of year, whether it's really a good idea to do that as parents. If you have to work hard to keep the story going, and maybe you are starting to get into some more gray territory where you're better off to just pull the Band-Aid off and have a good conversation with your kids about, we just had some fun with Santa Claus, but it was make-believe.
Yeah. I mean, I think we kind of have two podcasts in one here, but I think that they brought up a good question. And at the end of the day, when our kids are asking questions about the origins of Santa Claus and the truth, we need to tell them the truth. But it's something that they've made me think about that.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I would say. It's something I'd like to look at further. I mean, it's what my kids grew up believing in Santa Claus, and there was an age when they were told there is no real Santa Claus.
Well, I keep coming back to the idea of, I think there's some merit to the question that if you have to bend over backwards and kind of make a big deal out of trying to keep this going, then it becomes wrong. And if you're using it to try and get something from your children, or you're replacing the basis for morality as God, if you're replacing that idea with Santa, I think it can definitely get into some territory where it's wrong. But, every night I'll go into my kid's room, give them a hug and kiss goodnight. I'll tell them a little story. Usually it's a make-believe fantasy story. And then they want me to push the security button. It's a make-believe button. I make button noises, boop, 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 whoop, like that. And I'm activating the force field outside the house.
Really?
And it keeps them safe at night. It makes them comfortable, makes them able to go to sleep.
Yeah.
I think they know it's not real, but on a certain level, it brings a certain level of comfort to them. And am I lying to them? Is Christmas that different? Now, if I go out of my way and keep trying to cover it up and work hard at it, yeah, it can become a point where it's lying. But I don't know. I have a hard time seeing a difference. Like, I'm not lying to them. I'm encouraging fantasy and encouraging things that at this age is appropriate, but at a certain age, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to lie to my 14-year-old daughter when she gets to that age and keep this going about Santa Claus. But right now, I don't feel like it's a lie. I feel like they're young. Their minds naturally go this direction. And I enjoy seeing the innocence of their minds going towards fantasy and make-believe and things like this, believing that unicorns are real and that I can push some buttons and have a magic force field protect our house.
Yeah, I think that's probably where you could easily take this to is, are you then going to tell them that they're not a little princess and that they don't have, are you going to rob them of this innocence and this fantasy world that most of them are in? When you take them to Disneyland, okay, another spoiler alert, guys, here, is that really Mickey Mouse, the obvious 6-foot Mickey Mouse, or more like 5 feet, up there? Is that the Mickey Mouse they see on the TV? Is that the Ariel that they see in the movie? We give them this fantasy and this fun and this excitement level as kids because they are kids and they're supposed to be innocent. They're supposed to be, in that world.
My daughter's, we got 3 kittens, and one was Navy's, one was Bay's, one we gave to Grandma. And of course, it was Navy, our most sensitive kid. Her cat is the one that just didn't come home one night. I didn't lie about it and say, well, we gave the cat away or we took the cat somewhere else. I was very frank and said, the cat didn't come home. We waited several days hoping it would show up, and she just broke down into tears. I didn't tell her the truth that it was probably eaten by coyotes or run over by a car. She's innocent. She doesn't need to know that. I didn't lie or keep the truth from her. I told her that the cat didn't come back, but also it wasn't appropriate to be that frank, and that there's some elements of it I didn't need to fully give to her yet. There's a certain age where those things become more appropriate. And so in her mind, her cat might still be out there. And she thinks about it all the time. And we tell her, just understand, something bad may have happened. Your cat may be gone.
Oh, Paul, why don't you do your last kind of... Well, were you even running this one? No one ran this episode. That was usually...
It was a very long intro.
Seriously.
I think it was 2 episodes in one.
It wasn't a long intro. I did a short intro, and then I just kept going straight into the main part of it.
Yeah,
you forgot to transition it over to me.
Yeah, I know. I thought he was doing this one.
Yeah, no, but I just, it was in the flow. And
so we really tackled 2 things here.
Okay.
One was really talking about, is it counterproductive to make some of the arguments that we make about Christmas and the way we do it? So we talked about that. I think that was valuable. And then a question from our youth about how do you handle Santa Claus as parents, and is it wrong to have them believe in that myth? And I think the example you gave, John, at the end about the imagination of kids when they go to Disneyland and see a Mickey Mouse that's not real, and you're not telling them quite yet that, no, that's not the real Mickey Mouse, is a good example as to, the imagination that our kids have. And it's maybe a judgment call, but it made me think. Good question from the teens as to how we handle that. But our kids and the imagination that they have is a little different. But it gave all of you, hopefully as listeners, something to think about as we approach these things.
I appreciate Kyle's comments there too about what are we trying to get from this too, and are we substituting God, and we are substituting our responsibilities as parents and things like this with these things? Is that what we're trying to do, or are we trying to give them their innocence and their fantasy? And I think the intent does kind of matter on this one, and I think that a Romans 14 perspective is important here. It's hard to be parents, guys. Let's just not try to judge each other too harshly and come down on each other for what we do choose to do in our homes during this season, and what we choose not to do. And if you're going to do it out of conviction, do it out of your own conscience, and that is important. And
well, just remember the reason for the season. It's eating food. Actually, go back and listen to our gluttony episode.
Well, thanks, Kyle and Paul, for bringing the 2 sides of this conversation of the season together. And hopefully you've been listening throughout the rest of the season. Kind of the goal and the focus of this podcast has been to continually just try to have conversations about some topics we don't usually talk about from the pulpit, and we deal with as Christians in daily lives. And so we encourage you to continue to listen.
Let us know. I will tell you that when you give us feedback and tell us that you're enjoying or you're looking for it, that's what fuels our fire. And if there's something that we haven't done that you want to hear us talk about, or a guest that you'd like to hear from, let one of us know. We'd love to hear from you. If you're local in this congregation, let us know. Otherwise, send us a message on Facebook, and we'd love to hear from you. But thank you so much for listening this season.
Thanks, guys, for listening, and have a great holiday season. We'll see you back in January. Happy Chris Mahana Kwanzaa?
Chris Mahana Kwanzaa.
Mahana Kwanzaa.
Yeah, that's all of them.
So at the mall, when we see Santa Claus, we should really treat it like Will Ferrell and say, "You sit on a throne of lies."
Throne of lies.
Beef and cheese.
Do we have a conclusion to this one?
A bunch of Grinches here. Do whatever you want for Christmas.
Ho, ho, ho.
Merry Christmas, you filthy animals.